What's up, everybody? It's your favorite gay-looking straight boy, Hunter Avalone, here, back with another video. And today, of course, we are talking about the Derek Chauvin trial. I gotta say, yesterday, it was a riot. After an entire year of civil unrest, after the killing of George Floyd, Derek Chauvin was found guilty by the jury. He was found guilty of murder. A U.S. jury has found a former police officer guilty of murder over the death of African-American George Floyd on a Minneapolis street last year. Derek Chauvin, 45, was filmed kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes during his arrest last May. The 12-member jury took less than a day to reach their verdict, which followed a highly charged 3-week trial that left Minneapolis on edge. Throughout this trial, we learned a lot of very eye-opening information. We learned that fentanyl was in fact present in George Floyd's system, but it was not enough to cause his death. We know that 2 medical experts, including the Hennepin County medical examiner who conducted George Floyd's autopsy, remember, this guy is commonly cited by conservatives. They'll say, well, the first autopsy found that George Floyd died of an overdose. Well, this guy testified under oath, and he agreed with the autopsy results, which state that law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression were direct causes of Floyd's death. He does not look too happy.
Caption, verdict, reasonable risk. Find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are...
He really looks absolutely panicked. I mean, you could see his eyes going everywhere. Those are some crazy eyes. This is the face of a man realizing that he is no longer going to be able to hide behind the badge and get away with this criminal behavior. Remember, Derek Chauvin had a pretty long history of complaints levied against him. Derek Chauvin had a pretty long history of aggressive behavior. He was no angel. You can see here also as he's taken out, he has some writing on his hand, which is reportedly the number for his attorney in case the jury found him guilty. So hopefully, your palms didn't get too sweaty and melt that off, because you're gonna need that phone number, my G. Now, the other officers who were present when George Floyd was murdered, they are scheduled to go on trial in August. This is absolutely going to set a precedent. Now, Mr. Chauvin's conviction is unlikely to be admissible in the 3 other officers' trials, but the verdict will almost certainly be known by any juror. And the fact that Mr. Chauvin's actions were found to be murder will carry over to his former colleagues. So this definitely puts the other police officers in a little bit of a tough spot. And you know what? That's good. Good. I want to see police officers who are afraid for themselves if they don't speak out. This is a good start. I'm glad that Derek Chauvin was found guilty, but this is also a really rare thing. If you look at the overall statistics, it is extremely rare that police officers are found guilty of murder. It hardly ever happens. This is absolutely a landmark thing. This certainly changes things and sets a precedent. So I think this could affect the future trial and the future consequences that these other officers might face. And I think that's a good thing. Let Derek Chauvin and these other officers be an example of what happens when you don't speak out against bad behavior and when you don't speak out against officers who are abusing their position as law enforcement. Now, we of course will have to wait till August to see how that trial is going to go down. As far as Derek Chauvin, within the next 8 weeks or so, a judge will be sentencing him, Judge Peter Cahill. Under the state's guidelines, those with no criminal records would receive a presumptive sentence of 12.5 years for the murder charges and 4 years for manslaughter. The state law says even though Chauvin was convicted of 3 counts, he would have to serve only the one tied to the top charge. So it sounds like at minimum, Chauvin might be getting 12.5 years. He deserves longer, however. He, again, abused his position as law enforcement. He had a heightened responsibility to protect the community as a police officer, and he failed in every conceivable way. Whenever you have massive breaking news, you're sure to have a goldmine of cringe reactions, both from the left and the right. We'll start with the cringy liberal reaction, which comes straight out of the mouth of Nancy Pelosi. She thanked George Floyd for sacrificing your life for justice. Yikes? He didn't sacrifice his life. He was murdered. He's not Jesus here. Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, for being there to call out to your mom. Oh, gosh. How heartbreaking was that? Call out for your mom, I can't breathe. Nancy, honey, stop talking. But because of you and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will be synonymous with justice. This is a perfect example of virtue signaling going wrong. Nancy Pelosi, maybe she was having a little too much fun on 420, I don't know. She got up there and she started literally making George Floyd out to sound like Jesus Christ, who sacrificed himself for the greater good of the country and racial justice. That's not what happened. What really happened was George Floyd was murdered unjustifiably, but his death, although horrific, is leading to change. Her comments were met with harsh criticism, so she clarified. She said, George Floyd should be alive today. His family's calls for justice for his murder were heard around the world. He did not die in vain. We must make sure other families don't suffer the same racism, violence, and pain, and we must enact the George Floyd. Okay, this should have been the first thing she said. You can tell that she got up here at the mic, started spieling off some virtue signaling thing that she thought sounded good, and then after she faced a bunch of backlash, she had a quick phone call with her PR team, which quickly said, yo, post this. This sounds way better. Please do this now. And that's why this sounds better. This should have been her initial statement. And then following in the footsteps of virtue signaling gone wrong, the Las Vegas Raiders, who tweeted out, I can breathe. I'm going to be honest, when I first saw this, I kind of thought it was a 420 reference. Then I was like, hold up, wait. The Raiders put, I can breathe? They said, today we're able to breathe again because justice for George means freedom for all. It seems so obvious to me, it's almost challenging to articulate how this is so incredibly tone deaf. Talk about that. That was a rough trial, huh? I feel like I can breathe again. You don't think that might be a little tad insensitive? Maybe you want to read the room. I feel like maybe you guys should take a break from virtue signaling and, I don't know, practice more. That doesn't look so good. 8-8? Ooh. I think we can now say 8 win, 9 losses. We're gonna count this as a major loss. On the right, we have an entire cope mine full of conservatives crying and seething that a murderer has faced justice. No fair elections, no fair trials, no meritocracy, no marriageable women, no security, no fun. I'm so tired of it all. I have no place in this shithole country on this miserable planet. This really plays right into the whole idea that, like, these angry alt-righters are just depressed, sad little men. No marriageable women. Have you ever thought that maybe you're the problem, bro? I'm just so effing angry with 2021. Literally everything has gone wrong. The military, police, presidency, Supreme Court, and now local courts have failed us entirely. Everything is cucked. And I just want to show the world my anger. Let's hope that means just posting angry Pepe memes on 4chan. And nothing else, hopefully. And the worst part? I can't. I say that's the best part. There's no way for me to exact revenge on these assholes. If you're gonna exact revenge on anyone, it should be your spelling teacher. There's no way out, and I'm doomed to sit and stew in misery as the world just rots away. Or maybe you're sitting and stewing in misery because your entire worldview is based on nothing but the belief that you're a victim of some cabal trying to ruin white culture. I can't run. Are you fat? Why? I can't hide. All right, he's got to be fat then. I can't buy my way out, and I can't even fight an obvious enemy. I'm too poor, too young, and my health is too bad to become the next founding father or next Napoleon. I just feel utterly discarded and without hope in the future. This is almost sad. Like, these radical assholes are just sad, depressed individuals. This guy actually acknowledges that his mental health is really bad also. Like, I bet if he got on medication, maybe he wouldn't be so angry anymore. Shapiro also delivered the best take imaginable, probably the biggest brain take I've ever heard in my life. CNN's Don Lemon said that justice has been served. Ben Shapiro says, well, and we all know he would never have said this had the reverse verdict been reached. Checkmate, lib. Yes, Ben. Yeah, justice wouldn't have been served then. It was also pretty enjoyable seeing Hassan, who is a pretty dipshitty lefty type, but he did have a pretty funny ratio of this tweet when he said, it's almost like there's a difference between a murderer going free or not. And he got like hundreds of thousands of likes. It was an astronomical ratio, and rightfully so, because this is one of the dumbest fucking takes I've probably ever heard in my entire life. You honestly would have to be at a brain dead level to genuinely still believe that Ben Shapiro is some smart, big brain individual. You literally, like, you are mentally handicapped. Like, I'm gonna call the yellow short bus to come over here and pick you up right now. And then Tommy Lauren coped real hard by responding with a giant pivot. So, no rioting? Are there gonna be no looting, right? Chauvin was found guilty by a jury. He's going to go to prison, okay? The facts are in. He's guilty. He murdered George Floyd. And your response is, well, looting bad. That's how losers talk. Losers talk by moving the goalpost and pivoting all around and jumping to a topic they think they can condemn rather than facing the fact that they just took the second fattest fucking L next to the election fraud bullshit. Candace Owens, partisan hack, and major grifter also weighed in with, as you can guess, a brainlet take.
This is the most first world country that's ever been. You'd think the most civilized and the most just. Here you have to consider a murder case through the lens of politics. When you get to that point, haven't you already given up civilization?
That's a really long way of saying, when we think about things the way that we need to think about things in order to solve problems, is that going to destroy the entire world?
That's correct. And what we're really seeing is mob justice. And that's really what happened with this entire trial. This was not a trial about George Floyd or Derek Chauvin. This was a trial about whether the media was powerful enough to create a simulation and decide upon a narrative absent any facts. Whether it was powerful
absent any facts, despite the countless medical examiners testifying under oath that George Floyd died from asphyxia and it was a homicide. Besides those facts, right?
Enough to repeat showing and talking about a 9-minute clip that came from somebody's cell phone without adding any context, without showing the full, the full police video, which they could have released. They refused to release the full body cam, which would have added more clarity to the fact that the media was lying. The media came out. Let's not forget.
What are we talking about? They did release the full body cam footage. The jury saw the full body cam footage. It still didn't justify George Floyd being kept down with a knee on his neck for 9 minutes while he said he couldn't breathe, 3 minutes of which they couldn't find a pulse. This is just a fucking conservative lapdog running around and preaching against equality for black people. She's just against it to be against it. This woman has no morals. What she's saying isn't even true either. We all saw the full body. I mean, maybe not all of us, but I saw the full body cam footage, and I know the jury did also. So what are you talking about? Why are you trying to downplay the video like a 9-minute cell phone video? So what? You didn't seem to have this same attitude when it was a 3-second 360p cell phone video allegedly showing voter fraud.
The media came out. Let's not forget this, Tucker. The media came out and told us that this was a man who was just getting his life together. He was a good, good member of society.
Wrong.
And he got mixed up because a racist white police officer had it out for him and killed him.
See, this is how conservatives do it. It's really easy to always look like you're right when you never actually address the opposition's argument. That's like, it's incredibly easy. Just paint your opposition as having the dumbest take imaginable and then attack that. You're foolproof. You're on Fox News. You're up here making millions, dude. Maybe some people said that, Candace. Maybe some cringy liberals said George Floyd was a perfect individual that then all of a sudden fell victim to a racist cop. But most rational human beings are talking about this in terms of the broader context. We're talking about this in terms that this is indicative of a systemic issue, with police brutality disproportionately negatively affecting black people. A lot of that is because black people disproportionately commit crime, but that is because black people are disproportionately in poverty, which is because of previous racist policies like the drug war, like redlining, and so on. This is a nuanced discussion. This is not as, pun intended, black and white as just saying, oh, the cop was just an evil racist. Conservatives are trying to pivot like that too. Conservatives are saying, well, this never proved that Chauvin was racist. Got him. Guess what? It doesn't matter. I don't care if behind closed doors, Derek Chauvin was the MLK of his time. The truth of the matter is, his actions resulted in the death of George Floyd. George Floyd, being a black man killed by a police officer, is indicative of an underlying systemic issue with our police force. That's to say that individual police officers are not racist. I bet a good deal of police officers are not racist at all, but the police system is broken and it is producing racially disparate results.
All of that fell apart. All of the facts came out and all of that fell apart. We now know, of course, that he had enough fentanyl in him. It was 3 times the lethal dosage. 3 times lethal.
False. That was literally like debunked by the medical examiner that was under oath. So nice false information. Why are you so desperate to just defend a cop who murdered a black person? Like, why? Why do you feel the need to take this position to the point of just flat out lying?
Dosage in him when he died, but nobody cares because the media was successful in putting out a narrative and they kept hitting that narrative. And the reason why the Democrats are
no, everybody cared. It's just that doing drugs or having drugs in your system doesn't warrant the death penalty. Just if you had drugs in your system, just if you were a little bit distressed or acting a little funny, that doesn't justify having a knee on your neck for 9 minutes while you say you can't breathe. It's hard for me to not get angry when I talk about these issues because it is so blatantly obvious that there's a problem here, and yet you have these dumb fucks get up here on Fox News and spiel off this nonsense that boomers and conservatives just lap up.
Happy is because they realize, of course, the media supports them and now means the Democrats can get whatever they want because they can create a narrative and then they can treat people like pawns and get them to basically say, if we don't get what we want, we will riot, we will loot, we will send these people out like soldiers to destroy your neighborhoods. And
yup, that's what's happening. Let's see, what's more likely? An anonymous jury saw some really compelling evidence and saw a lot of video footage and came to the unanimous decision that this officer kneeling on the man's neck for 9 minutes was responsible for his death. That, or the Democrats are controlling the media, except for Fox News, which, by the way, is the biggest cable media network. So not them, but all the other media, the Democrats are controlling all the other media to manipulate the narrative to say that if we don't get what we want, which is this police officer found guilty, then we're gonna riot. Am I getting this correct? I'm sorry, I have a hard time keeping up with the menopausal ramblings of a mad woman. Throughout Chauvin's trial, jurors have been partially sequestered, which means they're put in isolation. They can't watch TV, they can't access the internet, they can't do anything that might sway their decision. So they've been partially sequestered, they've been supervised in the courthouse at all times, they have been allowed to go home at night. Before the verdict was released, they were all staying in a hotel where sheriff's deputies were present to make sure that they weren't leaving, that they're not having any communications with the outside world. And a professor even talked about how this is actually very common for high-profile cases. So there are a lot of precautionary measures being put in place to assure that the individual jurors are not having contact with the outside world where they can be swayed, manipulated, or approached. They have security with them at almost all times. It's very unlikely that the individual jurors were forced to make a decision that they didn't truly believe. Also, more broadly speaking, there are such things as jury instructions. There are a set of legal rules governing how jurors should behave when deciding a case, often addressing with whom jurors may discuss the case and how jurors will decide who is guilty. They are a type of jury control procedure intended to mitigate potential actions of jurors that may prevent a fair trial. They're anonymous. Remember, nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows their names. We know about the jury. We know that it was a pretty diverse group: white people, brown people, young people, old people. There was a nurse there. There was a chemist there. So it was made up of a pretty diverse group, but they're anonymous nonetheless. Now that we know the individual jurors weren't forced at gunpoint to make a decision they didn't want to make, the onus is on you, conservatives, to prove that the jurors were all pressured because they were worried that there might be riots if they don't vote the proper way. Couldn't you make this same argument for the O.J. Simpson case? I mean, there have been other high-profile cases in the past where juries have to make a decision. The truth of the matter is, you don't like the results of the decision, so you're coping and moving the goalpost and trying to blame it on some outside force so you can keep on pointing your fingers at the Democrats. Caitlin Bennett, and now we know our country will not be able to withstand the threat of the mob when asked to protect our innocence. Our justice system means nothing anymore. What are you gonna do, Caitlin? Cry? Maybe even shit a little? Tucker Carlson also had this former police officer on his show, and this guy was just railing on about how what Chauvin did was wrong, how what Chauvin did was excessive force, and this guy talked about how he had been in the police force for decades and he had to get physical and rough up people over 500 times. None of those times ever resulted in a person dying. So this entire very brief interview, this guy was basically just spitting straight facts. Tucker got so mad, he tried to pivot to the rioting and looting and then just cut him off in the interview. Take a look.
The scene. I just think that it was excessive and it shouldn't happen. And what I'd like to say,
the guy who did it looks like he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So I'm kind of more worried about the rest of the country, which, thanks to police inaction, in case you haven't noticed, is like boarded up. So that's more my concern.
See the pivot? Every time when they lose, they just pivot. It's how you do it when you're a fucking loser.
My concern. But I appreciate you coming on. Ed Gavin, thank you. Nope, done. Thank you.
Co-parter. And we'll go ahead and end this off with everybody's favorite shill, Sydney Watson. Now, Sydney Watson is pretty much what happens when you're breastfed soy milk from the beginning of your birth. She tweets, "Why the fuck does America emulate deadbeats and losers and turn them into role models? What backwards bullshit am I living through?" Now, this tweet from Sydney Watson plays right in line with her entire narrative this whole time, right? Which is, George Floyd is a criminal. George Floyd is a criminal. George Floyd is a deadbeat. He's a loser. This tweet over here from October, "America's the only country where people riot over criminals." Interesting, Sydney. Do you really believe that someone committing a crime means that they are exempt from due process? Do you think that George Floyd being on drugs means he's no longer owed liberty and being put in front of a court of law? Do you think just because George Floyd was allegedly a deadbeat and a loser that people shouldn't be angry about his unjustified murder? Just to make it clear, no one's turning George Floyd into a role model. George Floyd has become a large symbol when it comes to police injustice. That's what this is about. No one's gonna be like, George Floyd was unjustifiably killed by the police. I wanna be like him when I grow up. What are you talking about? Again, it's a straw man because these idiots don't know how to make any arguments. And what's even funnier is there's an extra layer of hypocrisy here. Conservatives consistently talk about cancel culture. Conservatives consistently preach that just if you made a mistake, it doesn't mean your whole life should be ruined. Yet now, when George Floyd is murdered, suddenly his past, every mistake he's ever made, well, suddenly that's all relevant. Sydney Watson actually did a little spiel once where she talks about how America's cancel culture is just like China. Let's go ahead and see what she has to say. Would anything apply to George Floyd here?
Cancel culture itself has become a huge issue, and in 2020, nobody can make a mistake. For whatever reason, we expect people to be infallible, and when they can't be infallible, then we expect them to apologize for their past mistakes and indiscretions.
So I see. The problem is, when we realize people aren't infallible, we ask them to apologize. But when someone's murdered, the fact that they're not infallible is justification for that? This girl is such a fucking hypocrite.
Even if those mistakes and indiscretions go back literally decades. And eventually...
Like George Floyd committing a crime decades ago and serving time in prison for it? You mean that? I'm not necessarily accusing Sydney Watson of being a racist. I'm just saying she seems to arbitrarily decide when someone's past is relevant, and she seems to be deciding that on the basis of race. So I'm not saying she's racist, but I'm kind of saying she's fucking racist. I could be wrong here, but I'm starting to get the vibe that conservatives have absolutely no principles. Sydney Watson is a shallow shell filled with right-wing talking points and grifter dollars. That's it. She is one of the most brain-dead, hypocritical fucking degenerates I've ever seen on the internet.
For whatever reason, we expect people to be infallible, and when they can't be infallible, then we expect them to apologize for their past mistakes and indiscretions, even if those mistakes and indiscretions go back literally decades.
Just watch that clip and then followed by these tweets. Why does America emulate a deadbeat? Bringing up George Floyd's past, which is completely irrelevant to the fact that he was unjustifiably killed. America's the only country where people riot over criminals. Wah, boo-hoo. Bringing up George Floyd's past, which is irrelevant because it doesn't change the fact that he was unjustifiably killed. So good job, Sydney. Seems that you're actually in favor of cancel culture when it's a black person who was murdered by the police, but when it's somebody that once said the N-word on Twitter, well, that's way too far. Don't you dare call that person out. Just the tip of the iceberg of the insane reaction to Derek Chauvin being found guilty. Ultimately, I do believe that this is a good thing. I think that this is a step in the right direction. I also think that you're going to hear conservatives say things like, well, I thought the system was broken. Guess the system's not broken now, huh? A broken system doesn't mean it never produces proper results. The police system, for example, is broken, but police still stop criminals sometimes. Again, the problem is about the underlying systemic issue disproportionately negatively impacting one racial group. So yes, the system is still broken, but this is a step in the right direction. I just wish it didn't take a police officer murdering somebody on camera and international outrage for justice to be served. I wish it didn't get to that point. I want police to be better trained. I would rather George Floyd be here today. And that's another thing too. Although it is fun to clown on conservatives, I clowned on conservatives in this video. I'm going to continue clowning on conservatives about this. It's also important to remember that George Floyd was a human being who tragically lost his life to police brutality. I always encourage trolling. I think that's fine, but I also think it's important to remember that this isn't just about scoring political points here. This is something very serious that happened, and it's a tragedy no matter what happens. But I am thankful that although this tragedy occurred, it does seem that some positive change is coming from it. And although it's bittersweet, it's a step in the right direction. So please give this video a like, comment below, subscribe to the channel. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Now, I gotta make sure there's no cameras here because I'm planning on taking a quick drink of some alcohol, which if I'm ever killed, that might be used by conservatives to justify my death. I truthfully don't know.